The moment he stood up and shouted, "Constitutional violations," before the clerk had even finished reading the case number, the whole courtroom snapped awake. Heads turned, pens stopped moving. The fluorescent lights washed the room in a cold, flat glare that made every face look sharper, every reaction easier to read. And there he was in the center of it, chin lifted, jaw set, waving a folder stuffed with homemade documents, as if he were about to put the entire justice system on trial. He wore a cheap navy suit polished by arrogance rather than money, a bronze eagle pin on his lapel, and the expression of a man who had mistaken internet slogans for immunity. "This court is trespassing on my natural person," he declared. "My rights have been violated at every level." And for one suspended second, with the gallery leaning forward and the bailiff already shifting his weight, it felt like something extraordinary was about to happen. At the prosecution table sat Elena Ruiz, and the contrast was almost cruel. She wore a modest cream blouse buttoned all the way to the throat, a dark cardigan despite the heat, and a soft brace around her left wrist beneath her sleeve. Her black hair was pulled back in a plain tie. She had the posture of someone trying not to take up too much space in a room that had already taken too much from her. 39 years old, widow, mother of a 12-year-old son, night shift cleaner, weekend delivery driver, the kind of woman who counted dollars before groceries and still made sure her child never went to school embarrassed. 3 months earlier, Martin Hale had plowed his pickup through a red light, clipped her car, and spun her into a utility box. Then, instead of helping, he had leaned out of his truck window and told police the stop, the arrest, the breath test, the impound, all of it was a constitutional kidnapping of a sovereign traveler. And if you've ever seen a man walk into a courtroom convinced the Constitution was invented to protect his ego from consequences, stay with this one, because what started as another loud sovereign citizen tantrum was about to turn into something much darker. And by the time Judge Miriam Voss was finished, there would be no one left in that room who didn't know exactly what Martin Hale really was. If you already feel where this is going, you might want to leave your verdict in the comments, because there is always a moment in stories like this when arrogance thinks it still has the upper hand, and then comes the sentence that changes everything. Judge Miriam Voss entered without drama, which somehow made her more imposing. She was in her early 60s, silver hair drawn into a clean knot, black robe falling in straight, severe lines, reading glasses low on her nose. Nothing theatrical, nothing wasted. Her face was composed, but there was a precision to the way she looked at people that made weak stories feel flimsy before they were even spoken. Around the courthouse, they called her the Quiet Blade because she did not shout, did not grandstand, did not perform outrage. She simply listened until the lie exposed itself, then cut through it with one sentence so clean it hurt worse than anger ever could. She took her seat. Martin was still standing. "Sit down, Mr. Hale," she said. "I do not consent to these proceedings." "Sit down." Something in her tone landed harder than volume. Martin sat, but not before giving a theatrical shake of the head and dropping his papers across the table with a crackling flourish. He wanted attention. He wanted spectacle. He wanted the room orbiting around him. Elena kept her eyes on her hands. The prosecutor began with what seemed, at first, almost ordinary. Failure to stop at a red light, driving without valid registration, no proof of insurance, resisting arrest, filing frivolous motions. Martin smiled through it, even yawned once, leaning back with one arm draped over the chair as though he were attending a seminar for lesser beings. When the prosecutor mentioned Elena's injuries, Martin actually smirked. That was the first warning sign. Then came the first twist. The state moved to admit not only traffic evidence, but communications records, property filings, and a supplemental affidavit from the county recorder's office. A murmur drifted through the gallery. Martin's head tilted. The smile faltered just slightly. The prosecutor turned to Elena and asked her to explain what happened after the crash. She spoke softly, but the room strained to hear every word. She described the red light, the impact, the airbag dust in her mouth, the metallic taste of blood, the pain in her shoulder so immediate and hot she thought for a second her arm had come off. She said she remembered seeing Martin step down from his lifted truck in mirrored sunglasses and tan tactical boots, not rushing toward her, not asking if she was breathing, but filming her car on his phone while repeating, "No contract, no injury claim, no jurisdiction." She said that later, after she gave a statement and missed 2 weeks of work, strange envelopes began arriving at her apartment. Notices in red ink, demands for payment, threats that she owed him for detaining a free traveler through her false report, then a lien filing against her damaged car, then letters to her landlord declaring she was engaged in commercial fraud. The courtroom shifted. What had felt absurd a minute earlier started to feel ugly. Martin clicked his tongue and muttered loud enough to carry, "If she understood the Constitution, she wouldn't be whining." Judge Voss looked up. "Another interruption like that, and you will regret it instantly." He raised both hands with a grin that was all mock innocence. "There it is, judicial intimidation." But the prosecutor was just getting started. He projected body cam footage from the arresting deputy. There was Martin in the harsh strobing wash of patrol lights, chest puffed out, refusing to produce a license because he was traveling, not driving. There was Elena in the background, still trapped in her car, crying out that her wrist hurt. There was the deputy repeating that medical help was on the way. And there was Martin, not looking at her once, launching into a rehearsed speech about admiralty law, fringe on flags, and constitutional kidnapping, while the paramedics worked around him. A few people in the gallery shook their heads. One older man whispered, "Unreal." Then came the second twist. The prosecutor introduced surveillance footage from a gas station half a block away, a higher angle than the body cam, clear enough to show Martin's truck accelerating into the intersection 3 seconds after the light had turned red, clear enough to show he never braked until after impact, clear enough to show the phone glowing in his hand. The prosecutor froze the frame. Martin's face, illuminated by his own screen, was turned downward just before the crash. Martin's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Martin crossed his arms and said, "Selective editing." The prosecutor didn't even look at him. "Then perhaps the defendant's own live stream will help." That's when everything changed. He played a clip pulled from Martin's social media channel, one he had proudly titled Roadside Constitution Lesson. In it, Martin was driving, ranting about government overreach, mocking wage slaves, and reading comments from followers while speeding through city streets. Just seconds before the collision, he laughed and said, "These delivery people clog everything up anyway. They breed dependency." Then the video lurched violently and cut to black. A gasp rolled across the courtroom. Elena lowered her head. Her shoulders tightened, but she did not cry. That made it worse somehow. Martin, sensing the room turning, got meaner. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed, and said the line that poisoned every remaining ounce of air in the place. "Let's stop pretending she's some saint. She's just another sob story with a car too cheap to survive impact." The courtroom went dead silent. Not ordinary silence, not polite quiet, dead silent. The kind of silence that makes the hum of the lights sound like static in your skull. Even Martin seemed to hear it a beat too late. Elena closed her eyes. The bailiff stared at Martin with open disgust. Someone in the back whispered, "My God." Judge Voss did not raise her voice. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you are confusing contempt with intelligence." He scoffed, but there was strain in it now. The prosecutor introduced the property records next. Martin had not simply sent Elena bizarre letters. He had filed 3 pseudo-legal commercial claims against her vehicle, one against her apartment address, and one against the county clerk who rejected his paperwork. He had also mailed a packet to Elena's employer suggesting she was engaged in insurance fraud and should be terminated pending private investigation. Her supervisor testified that Elena missed overtime because of the stress and almost lost her position until the company's legal department intervened. A records officer testified that Martin had filed nearly identical documents against 2 other drivers involved in prior disputes, both low income, both women, both pressured into dropping claims after months of harassment. Suddenly, this was not one traffic case, this was a pattern. Martin's swagger began to crack in visible stages. First, the tapping foot stopped. Then he stopped leaning back. Then he started whispering furiously to his attorney, whose face had gone a shade paler with every exhibit. When the prosecutor displayed recovered group messages from Martin's private chat, the collapse accelerated. There he was instructing followers how to bury claimants in paper until they begged for peace. There he was mocking judges as costume debt collectors. There he was telling one man, "Target the poor ones, they fold faster." A woman in the gallery made a sound like she had been punched. Judge Voss asked Martin if he wished to explain the messages. He stood again, but he was not grand anymore. Now he was sharp-edged, frantic, voice cracking beneath the performance. "This is all retaliation because I know my rights. Every American should fear what's happening here. Constitutional violations, illegal seizure, free speech suppression. You people think if you say enough legal words, you can erase the fact that I'm a sovereign man." Judge Voss folded her hands. "No, Mr. Hale. You think if you say enough legal words, you can erase the fact that you ran a red light and terrorized a working mother." He tried one more time, almost spitting the words. "She's using this court for welfare with extra steps." The courtroom went silent again. This time, Judge Voss removed her glasses and set them down slowly on the bench. Everyone knew something was coming. "What you call constitutional violations," she said, each word placed like stone, "are in reality the ordinary inconveniences of being told no. The Constitution does not shield recklessness, it does not sanctify fraud, and it does not transform cruelty into liberty because a man with a camera and a grievance decides to cosplay as his own nation." A murmur rippled outward. Martin's mouth actually fell open. Then came the line people would repeat outside that courtroom before the day was over. Judge Voss looked him straight in the face and said, "The Constitution is not a costume for cowards." You could feel it hit. Martin's shoulders sank half an inch. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. But Judge Voss was not done, and now her voice carried that rare, terrible calm of someone who has seen the moral center of a person and found it rotten. "You are not on trial because you challenged power. You are on trial because you abused it in the petty, ugly way available to you. You injured a woman already carrying more burden than you have likely ever known. You watched medics pull broken glass away from her while you performed for an audience. Then, when faced with accountability, you launched a campaign of harassment designed to frighten her into silence because you believed poverty would make her easier to crush. You mistook her vulnerability for weakness. You mistook procedure for oppression. You mistook your own selfishness for political principle." Martin's face reddened. The skin under his eyes had gone shiny. He was no longer an ideologue. He was a cornered bully, Judge Voss continued, and every syllable seemed to strip another layer off him. "There are people in this country who invoke constitutional rights because history taught them what it costs when power goes unchecked. And then there are men like you who invoke those same rights as camouflage after causing harm. One is citizenship. The other is cowardice wearing vocabulary." Martin whispered, "This is a setup." She didn't blink. "No, Mr. Hale. This is a mirror." Then she delivered the judgment. Guilty on reckless driving, resisting lawful orders, filing fraudulent liens, witness intimidation, and harassment. Immediate referral for additional fraud review. Restitution for Elena's medical expenses, lost wages, vehicle replacement costs, and emotional damages. Permanent no contact order, all false claims voided and expunged. 16 months custodial sentence with consecutive penalties for the retaliatory filings. She ordered his channel earnings tied to the monetized live stream produced during the offense to be examined for victim compensation, and when he lurched forward to protest, Judge Voss cut him off with one final sentence that flattened what was left of him. "Freedom requires responsibility, Mr. Hale. What you wanted was exemption." The bailiff moved in. That was the moment the arrogance finally died. Martin twisted toward the gallery as if searching for believers, for supporters, for somebody to validate the version of reality he had sold for so long. But the eyes on him now were not admiring. They were embarrassed, disgusted, finished. His chest heaved, his lower lip trembled. "This is unlawful," he said, but the force was gone. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, and the sound was small, metallic, undeniable. Elena did not smile. She simply exhaled, one long, shaking breath, and for the first time all day she sat a little taller, not triumphant, stronger. The kind of stronger that comes when fear finally loses its grip. Her hands were still rough from work, her cardigan still plain, her life still difficult, but the humiliation that had been pushed toward her for months had turned around and found its rightful owner. In the weeks that followed, the county voided every false filing Martin had made. Two more victims came forward. One was an elderly mechanic he had papered with fake debt notices after a dispute over repairs. The other was a nursing student he had harassed after a parking lot collision. Elena's employer reinstated her overtime and organized a donation drive to help cover the days she lost. A local attorney volunteered to help her pursue civil recovery. Her son, who had been afraid every time the mail arrived, started sleeping through the night again. And when Elena finally got a replacement car, used but reliable, she drove it home with both hands on the wheel and the windows down, like she was reclaiming not just transportation, but breath. That is why people still talk about the day a sovereign citizen screamed constitutional violations and Judge Voss fired back instantly, because what happened in that courtroom was bigger than a legal defeat. It was exposure, it was moral clarity, it was the reminder that some people hide behind grand language not because they love freedom, but because they hate accountability. And when the lie is finally cornered by evidence, witnesses, records, footage, and truth, all the theater in the world cannot save it. If that verdict felt satisfying, if you've ever watched someone weaponize fake principles to excuse real cruelty, leave your verdict in the comments, like this story, subscribe for more courtroom justice, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that eventually the performance ends, the courtroom goes silent, and the truth speaks in a voice no fraud can outshout.